Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Leviticus. Today we are looking at Leviticus chapter 19, still part of what we call the Holiness Code. Note how the chapter begins. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel. Say to them, be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." So again, we see that emphasis in the Holiness Code that Israel is to be a different kind of nation, different from the peoples around them, because they belong to God. Now in chapter 19, we find a various assortment of laws, of a great amount of laws, and some of them deal with quite varying topics. Some of them are repetition of what we've seen before. Some of them are further explanations of what the law means. But throughout them all, we see that the Israelite people are a different kind of people. And one of the emphases that comes out of this chapter is that Israelite society is to be fair and just to all people, because it's God's people. And fairness and justice must be a hallmark of a community that worships the Lord. So one of the laws deals with making provision for the poor. Notice in verse 9 it says, "Now when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord, your God." So you notice part of the provision in Israelite society was to make allowance for the poor that they might provide for themselves. So when you're harvesting your field, don't go over it a second time. What is left, allow the poor to come through and gather from what is left, that they may have provision and take care of themselves. A society that cares about those who are in a difficult economic situation. That's God's society. Now we will see that law played out in the book of Ruth. You remember when Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi returned to the land of Israel, they are without husbands and they are impoverished. And so Ruth goes to the field of Boaz, and after the field is harvested, she along with the poor goes through the field collecting what is left. This law is being played out. Israelite society was supposed to care for all people and make provision for the poor. You also are supposed to be fair in the administration of justice. Notice in verse 15 it says, "Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly." In other words, this society is to be a society that is just and that is right and that is fair. As verse 18 says, "Do not seek revenge or do not bear a grudge against anyone among your people. Love your neighbor as you love yourselves. I am the Lord." So here we're told you're not to bear grudges, you're not to carry resentment, but you are to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Remember, Jesus would take that verse and say that's the second command. First is love God with all of your heart. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. This was part of the Holiness Code that makes for a just kind of society. In verse 35 it says this, "Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length or weight or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights. For I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." In other words, even in your economic transactions with people, in your economic doings, be fair, be just, measure correctly, measure fairly, charge people right. You are my people, God says, and every part of your life must respect who I am and show the world who I am. So the Holiness Code has to do with laws of justice and fairness and having a good society, the kind of community you'd want to live in. And so the Israelites were told, this is the kind of community you ought to be, because you are my people and I am your God. Hope you join us tomorrow for our next 5-minute Bible study in the book of Leviticus.